Just hello, hello, hello,
Hello, hello.
hello, hello, hello.
I tend to shout.
Yeah, should be fine with that.
Good.
Yeah, no, that was always one of the complaints in school. It was always very low,
Yes.
soft-spoken. Even for an Irish person, I'm soft-spoken.
Well, Irish people, the English have a prejudiced idea all the Irish are great at talking, but they come in all shapes. They're rather like Americans in that respect. They're much more varied than people talk about. Yeah.
So as a starting point, I was thinking, just because it's out there, kind of my my birth year, or kind of around that, kind of 87 to 90.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of starting there, where was kind of libertarianism at?
Well, I think it was around 87 or 86 that one of the more significant institutions of London libertarianism just closed, and that was the Alternative Bookshop in Covent Garden, which was managed by the much missed still Chris Tame, whom I don't think you've ever met, but anybody of my vintage will be talking about him. Not necessarily friendly though, because I'm afraid there was a horrible rift in the libertarian movement earlier in the 1980s, but nevertheless, that bookshop was critical in getting libertarianism, putting it on the map in London, I would say.
Okay.
I came to London in the late 1970s, sort of. I knocked on the door of the Institute of Economic Affairs, which I think is quite telling because they'd already made their presence felt.
Okay.
And I talked with them for about 1 minute, and they immediately identified me as somebody who ought to go fuck off to the bookshop, get out of this building. You don't really suit this place quite so much, but the bookshop is just where you want. Because I'd already read David Friedman's book, The Machinery of Freedom.
Mm-hmm.
How that was stocked in a bookshop in Staines, I'll never know, but it was. So that's how I got to hear that there was this thing called libertarianism. So I'm digging further back. It says something about the kind of libertarian I am, but I want to go before 1987 because that was about halfway through my best years. What happened after that was that we kept from where I was, we kept the Chris Tame half of the Libertarian Alliance in being. We did lots of mailings of pamphlets, of which there were something of well over 500 that I remember desktop publishing, which was the core technology for communicating at the time.
And would that have been weekly or monthly, or
no? It was just as often as we could do it.
Right, yeah.
I mean, we did mail shots. I don't know. It must have been about 3 or 4 a year, something like that, and with a great stack of pamphlets, either A4 or A3 folded or A3 stapled together.
Yeah.
I purchased an A3 photocopier, which was a critical piece of kit.
Wow.
And a long-armed stapler, so that the staples would be on the spine and they looked printed.
Okay, yeah.
And that was critical to the atmosphere I was engaged in creating. Basically, the division of labour between me and Chris Tame from about early 1980 to about mid 1990s, when our relationship began to fray a bit. It wasn't that we got angry, it was just that we drifted apart somewhat, physically as much as anything.
And I suppose,
and critically, the internet was coming on stream, and that made all the difference.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I just wanted to get kind of, I suppose that closing of the bookshop and kind of the rift then, was that ideological or?
No, I don't think it was ideological, really. Personally, I would describe it as a titanic ego battle between the two stags with antlers of London libertarianism, Chris Tame, whom I've already talked about, who was a very belligerent individual in the sense that he was a sort of all or nothing arguer. It didn't get violent at all, but it often threatened verbally. Quite. And the other one was a man called David Ramsay Steele, who was a superlatively talented polemicist and orator, who now lives in the United States. He works in publishing. And they couldn't be doing with each other, those two. Steele wanted to have a committee, which was a committee with decisive power, which was an attitude I was then much more hostile to than I am now, because I think committees cause institutions to persist.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they can be machines for tormenting those doing the work with the opinions of those doing fuck all. I can feel myself getting angry about it at the time. And Chris Tame worked very, very hard. He ran the bookshop. I was the pamphleteer for his version of the Libertarian Alliance, and he did everything else. That was about fair as a division of labour, because the pamphleteering was central to what we were doing. But if somebody like Chris is being commanded by people whose only contribution is to sit on a committee, you can see how I wouldn't have put up with it.
Yeah.
Chris certainly wasn't going to put up with it, and I agreed with him. I thought it was stupid. I think institutions need to have power in alignment with who's doing things.
Yeah.
The people who are doing it should have the clout. And they should essentially be like, after all, they weren't being paid anything.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
So it was I thought a deeply destructive way of doing things. But it could be that this committee idea was overplayed by me, because since then several people on the other side of this feud have been doing very worthwhile things. I would pick out David McDermott, who runs meetings constantly. I don't think he's that keen for me to show up at these meetings, or if he is, he does a good job of concealing it, because I keep wanting to be on his email list, and I never seem to get the emails. And, I don't think he regrets my absence. Let me put it like that.
This might be more of a conclusionary kind of question, but is the theme of ego one that runs through libertarianism?
I think it probably is. I think that the phrase herding cats springs to mind. Yes, I think that may be one of the things that makes the libertarian movement very hard to run. However, I think that the way you run the libertarian movement, I mean, now we're sort of branching off into philosophy. I did a talk for, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but Simon Gibbs got me to do a talk basically along the lines of how to do libertarianism, what I think of the libertarian movement. I basically said everybody runs their own operation, which does not mean that they are egomaniacs and indifferent to the activities of other people. On the contrary, they cooperate very carefully with other people. They invite other people to speak. They react to other people's writings. It would be a great mistake for people who want to be effective libertarians to think only in terms of their own little operation. They should always be thinking in terms of the wider movement and what they think it needs and what arguments it ought to have and all that sort of stuff. But essentially, and this is a strength actually, we believe in applying the same organizational methods to our own activity. Well, no, not we believe it, we actually do apply these methods to the running of our own movement that we believe should apply to everybody else. Yeah. There is a complete alignment between our principles about how the world should be and the way the libertarian movement actually works. And like the world, it occasionally gets into bloody great spats, which hopefully don't get too nasty. But mostly it doesn't happen. The thing I still worry about is, if I had said to Chris Tame, I will only cooperate with you if you change the name, would that have made things better? Because I think both Ramsay, Steele and Tame one of them should have surrendered, and both of them were idiots for not surrendering. The name. They should have changed the name. And I wonder if I could have used the sort of strike threat Then again, I hadn't done all the things I was going to do, so it wouldn't have looked like a particularly disastrous thing if I just disappeared. But in practice, both sides thought they could win, that they could defeat the other's ownership of the name, and both sides were utterly mistaken. It was very stupid.
So what was the power of this name? What was in that?
Well, it was just that Chris thought he'd done all the work, and Steele thought he should be in charge of it, and Chris didn't. Chris Tame didn't think that. That was it. It wasn't ideological. That was the weird thing.
Yeah.
There was no. I mean, there was sort of. I think there were sort of tonal differences, but those weren't the reason for the fight. It was an ego clash.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Others may have different opinions. It may be that if you talk to David McDermott, he would say there were fundamental ideological differences, including things like the attitude towards the USSR, which I would say I was a ferocious anti-communist, as was Tame, and it's possible that the other guys saw themselves as what you might call anti-communist, not pro-communist, certainly not, but they were very sceptical of the idea that anything much needed to be done about the USSR. They believed it would just fall apart of its own accord. I didn't, and I don't think that. I think other people outside it did a lot to put a stop to it. But that might be the alternative explanation. That's the ideological issue I remember as being the most contentious. But it never got nasty, that one.
Okay.
We had lots of arguments we made it our business to have arguments about libertarian. The way to spread ideas is to argue about them. So there's no reason why that one should have been hugely significant. We got along quite amicably while disagreeing about. It's more a case of emphasis than anything else. So I think it was an ego clash, power struggle.
Okay. So then, kind of taking it back then to the early 90s, let's say, when the shops closed and kind of you're moving on, then where did things go from there? So,
well, I would say that the next big event was the arrival of the internet.
okay. So 95?
Well, it depends. Of course, it depends what you mean by the arrival of the internet. I mean, I know people who date it from the 1960s, when DARPANET started, and then there were all these chat rooms that were going in the late 90s. Personally, for me, it wasn't so much the internet, it was the World Wide Web where you could publish things. And the critical thing was that the artwork I had done for the Chris Tame Libertarian Alliance in PDF format, that will mean something to you, maybe not, most people listening probably know what that is, was transferable to the internet, and you could just print it off on a laser printer.
Okay, so you had done this already on the computer.
Well, another personality I should mention is Sean Gabb, who would be worth talking to. And he had the skill of converting a PDF file into something publishable on the internet. That now I think it's easier, but then it was tricky, I think. Anyway, if it wasn't tricky, I didn't know how to do it. And so he and I, between us, I would send him the files in PDF form and he would shove them up. He did the website.
Okay.
And this was critical because what that did was it informed a much less infinitesimal number of people what libertarianism consisted of and how libertarians were thinking about things. And that meant that when blogging began in about 2001 or 2, there were several dozen libertarians bursting with things they wanted to say and now could say on the internet. And this was a very big thing. And interrupt me when I've missed anything out. No, but for me, one of the key moments in my life as a libertarian was, and it was in this room that it happened. Perry de Havilland, who I also recommend you speak with if you can, probably more likely to do it on the phone than in person. He's a bit busy doing what he's doing now, but I do recommend you speak to him at some point. he showed me this blog he'd cooked up with a couple of his friends called Samizdata, which is still going. And I knew as soon as I set eyes on it, oh yes, that's what we've wanted all this time. I remember another libertarian by the name of Antoine Clarke, who wasn't such a force in the libertarian movement, but is a very intelligent guy, and again, well worth talking to if you want to dig up all this stuff, because he lived in among all this. He was very much on the side of Chris Tame against David Ramsay Steele, so he'll give you that side of it. But I remember him giving a talk at the home of Tim Evans, who's another person I suggested you talk with, about how what we need as libertarians is middle-brow magazine writing, where it's not that you bang on about the private ownership of the means of production, distribution and exchange, but you write articles about dog breeding and yachting and car racing and dentistry and anything you want, but with a kind of libertarian assumption behind it. And then suddenly, and this was impossible at the time when he gave the talk, you know, magazines, you know, good luck getting one of those going and keeping it going. It's well nigh impossible. But then suddenly, blogging, there it was, you know, and it's become more and more like that ever since. It quite soon became pretty easy to put pictures up. And for a few years, Samizdata was a hugely important publishing enterprise. And it much magnified the achievement of all those leaflets in causing a whole generation of people who were on their way to libertarianism in their own private thinking, pushed by such things as the IEA and the ASI, but not quite getting there. Suddenly read, yes, I found my home, you know. And I would say that for a few years, two vitally important things were happening. First of all, libertarians were running riot on the blogosphere. We had been waiting decades for something like this. And we weren't bothered that we weren't getting paid. We were just, we'd been struggling with costs, and suddenly we didn't have to. Gorgeous, you know, none of that sort of A3 printer, where do you put it, all that, how do you pay for the paper and the postage and all that bollocks. All of that suddenly disappeared. And that was the experience of libertarian bloggers all over the world, in my opinion. That's what happened. And we all took to it like ducks to water. And now I was just one of the flock of ducks, you know. I wasn't anything special anymore. I stopped being having any sort of title. One reason I stopped, I remember this, and I think this might apply to some other libertarians, was that I could feel the whole Muslim argument suddenly, 2001 is when that blew up, literally, and I wanted the freedom to speak my mind about Islam, which I, from time to time, have done ever since then. But many libertarians wouldn't have the same attitude as me towards that. Many libertarians I have a lot of respect for say, look, it's just a religion. It's what people believe. It's religious freedom is the issue. Well, I don't contest the right of anybody to think what they want, but I'll bloody well insist on disagreeing with it if I think it's nonsense, which I think Islam is. So I didn't want to be an officer of the libertarian movement, of any institution. I just wanted to be a punter.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the collectivist opposition to libertarianism spent a few years making a big mistake. It thought that if it ignored the blogosphere would go away. This was delusional, but that was the dominant attitude on the left. You would read Guardian articles saying, this internet, oh no, it's not going to last. Unbelievable that people should seriously think that, but they said that. It was wishful thinking. They wanted it to just go away. The idea that they had their hegemony of intellectual activity just ripped out of their hands, and it has basically stayed out of their hands ever since, was something they just didn't want to think about.
And so, in that, because I mean, what you described initially was something I used to do when I was on the left, kind of with the leafleting and stuff like that. That I imagine was absolutely dominated by the left.
Well, I imagine it was. Yes, I think it was. Yes, but more to the point, the dominant media were centre left. You know, that was where they were. I mean, the default assumption of most intelligent people was something like, "Here's a problem. What's the government going to do about it?" That was it. And if you said that, I remember one of the things we did in those. This is now we're going back a bit. Before the internet, a characteristic thing I and Chris Tame and the rest of us would do was appear on minority radio shows, you know, sometimes very late at night. And I can still remember some of these set twos we had, but the broadcasters liked us because we had basic principles that could be relied upon to stir it up. And British broadcasting is filled with the idea that you cannot get at the truth without arguing about it. And I agree about that. And so even though they didn't like our principles, they liked the fact that we had principles and were prepared to speak them out loud, because their principles do much better than people droning on with statistics. That is a turn-off to the sort of audiences they were attracting. And they liked the fact that we would say, look, it's not a matter of how many people die from heroin. It's a matter of who's deciding what risks people will take, for instance. And they like the way that libertarians would shift away from mere pseudo evidence towards the heart of the matter. We were good at that. And so I think we probably had a disproportionate influence. And quite a lot of people scattered around the UK will have heard libertarian ideas for the first time. They will have heard us babbling away and say, did he just say that? He just said he was in favour of legalising prostitution or heroin or whatever it was, you know. We tended to emphasise, or no taxation, we tended to emphasise the extreme case. My attitude was, we want to be heard and understood. And if we're disagreed with, fine, so long as we're understood. Rather be understood than agreed with for bad reasons. You know, when people think we're just nice people or something. No, we want to speak to the people who having the same sort of intellectual journey as we've been having. And those people also, as soon as the internet got into its stride, typed libertarian into the great big machine, and out came the whole story, you know.
You were talking about...
I can feel myself swerving around in all directions.
Fine, that's my job to put it together. You were talking about Samizdata. Would you know now, kind of, from that time, kind of what the traffic was like?
It was I wouldn't. To be blunt about it, I've never known what the traffic was. For me, that was, again, part of the appeal. You didn't have to, you see, with the printing press and with photocopying, the number of these things you shift is a huge issue.
Yeah.
The internet, you can just forget about it. And to me, that's the glory of it. You can speak your mind and that's it. But I'm pretty sure that it was very high when it started. It leapt up as soon as word got round that these Brits were saying these things. Because don't forget, a lot of Americans love it when foreigners agree with them.
Yeah.
That cheers them up no end. And they loved Samizdata. We got linked to constantly by Instapundit, which is still going strong and from strength to strength. But I get the feeling that Samizdata has dwindled. I think it was as if we had a kind of huge suitcase full of pent-up ideas and things we had to say. And after a bit, we kind of said them and hadn't made any detectable impact on the world. I think we probably had some impact, but, you know.
So
I'm guessing it was many thousands, but I don't know, honestly don't know. Ask Perry de Havilland, he may not answer it. And I suspect that it's now gliding downwards.
But I suppose if it was being linked to at the time to a large American audience, then whether or not people saw it, they were aware of it. So
people in Britain paid attention to it. It certainly freaked out quite a few leftists. Not to the point where they tried any stupid methods of stopping it, but They didn't like it, the ones that noticed it. Yeah, I think it was a very big deal in the first few years. I think a turning point was the arrival of the social media, which you can say was the left realizing that they couldn't ignore this stuff. They had to get themselves organized. And that was the means by which they reasserted the traditional balance of the media that had prevailed before the internet came along, I would say.
So you'd see Facebook, Twitter as just purely tools of the left?
No, I mean,
so-
that I would not tools of the left straightforwardly. I would say that the people who set them up were much more libertarian in their mentality than the people they subsequently hired. What they did was they hired big workforces to answer questions like, well, you know, are we going to allow straightforward death threats?
Yeah.
Or what do we say about people who are reporting that they've broken the law themselves, or urging you to break the law? What, you know, any publisher, no matter how relaxed he tries to be, faces questions like this, and that was where the left-wing bias entered. That's my understanding. I don't know anything about these people. I've never spoken with anyone. I know one person who was a little bit towards the top end of Facebook, but that's about it. But my understanding is that what causes the bias isn't the top people, it's the massed ranks who sit there saying, well, I don't like that, delete, you know. And then 2 weeks later, somebody complains and chases it up and they undelete it. But you have that going on all the time, and not everybody makes a fuss when they have their Twitter account abolished or something. They just say, well, fuck Twitter, I'm not going to do it anymore. If they won't let me say what I want, I'm not going to say it. And I don't use the social media, partly because I just love blogs. I mean, I have a sort of sentimental attachment to blogging. And I don't trust social media. I think my understanding is that there may come a time when Twitter and Facebook and these other things will just be deleted because somebody will have the power to do that. And I don't trust that.
Yeah.
I don't think it will done malevolently. I think it'll just happen. You know, there'll be a huge kind of, I think sooner or later one of these big social media organizations will get into financial trouble because there's been a shift in advertising or something. At which point, you know, all sorts of rather hasty decisions will get made about what we're going to go on doing. And in among all that, half of what they've published, I'm waving my fingers in inverted commas, will be unpublished maybe. So I don't trust it. I don't completely trust the internet as a whole, but I trust blogs a bit more to hang around in some form or other.
So just kind of, I want to go back kind of more of a broad question, was if we can title what we did there as kind of media. The reaction to various governments from libertarians in London, what was that like, and did that change things? So like kind of going from Major to Blair to Brian to...
I think most libertarians were hostile to New Labour just as they are and were hostile to Old Labour. A few saw some benefits here, but I think I'm trying to think how to put this exactly. I think most of them were rather indifferent to Blair. Their attitude was, well, what can you do? You know, the answer, keep on saying what we're saying and hope people can carry on listening and keep getting influenced.
It's just that's quite interesting, because that seems to be still the mentality with libertarians, is that it doesn't matter if you switch from Obama
there's
to
a line
Trump,
there's a line in an old Tom Lehrer song about rockets, which is, this is the Germans, we send them up, who cares where they come down, that's not my department, said Werner von Braun. Libertarians are a bit like that with ideas, in my experience, and I am in favour of that. I when I started as a libertarian, and Chris Tame was the same, our feeling was that libertarians were far too dependent upon the sayings and doings of politicians and far less concerned with talking about what Perry de Havilland would describe as the metacontext, the underlying assumptions. You know, I was talking about how the statement, this is terrible and the government should fix it, were regarded as the same statement. Yeah. Well, you and I both know they are not. They're absolutely not. And understanding that distinction is far more important than whether this or that person is elected to Parliament and what he happens to say for himself. And I think that's been the underlying notion. That ideas really count. And politicians are in another sort of game. They do something different. I'd be interested to know what other people say about that, but that's my understanding. I'm both putting forward a personal view and how the libertarian movement felt to me.
So then kind of in real terms, not in blogging and kind of real life, kind of say post 9/11, how did things progress from there?
Well, speaking personally, I wasn't any longer, didn't have a kind of big overview, and I was getting old. I just carried on blogging for Samizdata with gradually diminishing frequency. Did my own blogging personally, by no means all of it political, again about background ideas. And if there was one background idea that I wanted to push on all the blogging I did, it is that there's more to life than party politics. There is enjoyment. There is just aesthetics, not in the sense of should this get a government grant or should that not, but just what does taking pleasure in life consist of, that sort of idea, which is not at all the same as, I mean personally I was highly delighted when Conservatives won general elections. And I remember predicting that John Major was going to be re-elected, which he was, which came as a bit of a surprise to some people. I personally voted for Brexit. I was delighted when Donald Trump was elected president rather than Hillary Clinton. And I've been agreeably surprised by how much good stuff I think he's done and how much bad stuff I don't think he's done. I still worry about the deficit and all that. I think if there was one political issue which a lot of libertarians did think about, it was the whole money supply thing, the fact of government money. And when the 2008 chaos erupted, we weren't that surprised. A lot of us had been expecting something like that for years. The surprise was how smoothly politicians have managed to keep things jogging along since then, keep the plates all spinning at the top of the sticks, and yeah, that is a surprise, I think. I know plenty of libertarians who thought that by now we'd be living in caves, I mean, the joke. This is also to do with Austrian economics, which is central to the way libertarians think about the world. Many of them, anyway. Many of us.
Yeah.
The joke is that Austrians have predicted 10 of the last 3 financial crises, and I think that applies to a lot of libertarians. I think we're amazed that, the British economy seems to be kind of staggering on much as usual. And I think if you'd asked libertarians in 2009 what the story, 2010 would have been, what's the story going to be in 2020, wouldn't have been nearly so good as it's been.
But I think, is there the case then, this is actually no, that's just me discussing it
Yeah,
now.
that's fine.
It's just that kind of that this is deficit spending on benefits to keep a class of people who would otherwise be unemployed and be suffering in this place, and how long that deficit spending can go on.
I think it's the overall public spending bill that frightens libertarians. I think a lot of them you'd get very varied answers about exactly where they think the public spending ought to be attacked straight away. Personally, I do think there's something a bit different about the NHS in the following sense. I certainly think that a complete free market in medicine would be vastly better than the NHS. But I get why the average tax-paying punter makes a distinction between the NHS and other things, which is that illness is not something people indulge in just to get their hands on government money, on the whole. I mean, there are a lot of people wangling disability benefit who perhaps shouldn't. But on the whole, you don't get diabetes in order to be paid by the government. That is not something people do. It is a genuine misfortune, even if it's self-inflicted in some sense. And that means that most people have a different attitude towards public spending on medical care than they do towards just giving able-bodied young men what amounts to a pension, a sort of young age pension. They think that's wrong, and they especially think it's wrong if these people misbehave, which they're liable to do if they got their income automatically as a right, and how they behave doesn't affect the money. You know, most people, you behave like a twat at work, you risk your salary. But if it doesn't apply to welfare recipients, that's a problem, especially for people who are working very hard and not doing that much better financially. So I don't know. You'd get lots of different answers from libertarians on those sorts of subjects. That what I said about arguing about this is the kind of thing I mean.
Okay. So bringing that back then, with and kind of how we met with Simon's thing and Libertarian Home. When did that start up then?
Well, I'm very bad at dates. I always have been. When was it? Must have been about 5 years ago, was it?
Okay. I mean, I think I was in Birmingham at that stage.
I see. I think it's I think about 5, 6, 7 years ago. Ask Simon. Are you in touch with him?
Yeah.
Good, because he'll tell you the dates. My opinion of Simon is extremely high because it comes down to this thing about sending up ideas and not caring where they come down. I am of that persuasion. He, however, has tended not to be in the public statements he's made. He's a man who very much wants to have immediate impact on politics, which I don't think fits in with most of the libertarian movement. I think that the world that does that is the world of the think tanks and the salaried political contrivers and stirrers. The ASI would be a better fit for that state of mind. Trying to take the libertarian movement and turn it into some sort of political machine for having impact in the here and now, rather than just having the impact that consists of reading some memoirs in 50 years' time by one of the world's most powerful people who says, and by the way, libertarianism had a profound influence on the way I think about everything, with the results that you can now all see. That was what I always... That's how I thought of it. I remember actually giving a talk at Simon's where I said, you know, those two guys in the corner there, they may very well give up on this institution and go off and become billionaires, but they will... The ideas that we share with them will still be the ones that make the difference. Simon wasn't content with just doing that, it seems to me. And he was very frustrated with himself for failing to make a stir in the world. And I always thought he was doing a brilliant job. I mean, you know, what brought you and I into a state of friendship rather than just distant acquaintance was the fact that I have my meetings every month here. But I don't expect them to have any consequences. Occasionally they do. They appear to have had some sort of impact. I remember a few names of people who've come to these things, and this was part of their thinking. I'm not going to say it was a dominant part, but just, put it this way. If you are a free market inclined wearer of a quite good suit with a quite good position in the free market classical liberal movement, it's different when you meet a bunch of people who think you are a backsliding centrist. It changes your look at the way that you look at the world and of what you're doing in it. And it may provoke some thoughts that might not otherwise have been provoked. The best example I can think of, which might have been influenced, was a man called James Tooley. Now, he is the world's leading expert on private sector education for the world's poor. He's been scouring the earth in the slums of great cities in India and Africa and all sorts of places, and just coming across little schools with about 20 people in them, one teacher, a blackboard, all very low tech, very cheap, a scumbag building, but really effective primary school, especially education. And he attended these meetings, I'm trying to think when, around 2000, can't remember which side, but around that time.
So sorry,
and that the reason I mentioned him is because he's the living embodiment of the kind of influence that I was self-consciously trying to have, and that Simon Gibbs, sorry, I always get it muddled up with another guy. Simon Gibbs was not content with having. He wasn't happy to just hope for something like that, which I thought was very sad, because I thought he was doing very, very, very well,
So your own meetings here in these talks, then, how long have they been going now?
There was a gap after blogging got into its stride in about 2007. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was around then. It was the middle of the tens, or the noughts, whatever you call it. Yeah, the noughts. I stopped doing it because the original raison d'etre of these meetings was to stir up writing for the Libertarian Alliance, to get to know people. I mean, if I'd met you in 1995, I would have been making you write pamphlets. And that's what they were for, as far as I was concerned. And that was all blown to smithereens by the internet. And we had this rather unreal period where it seemed to be going really well for us. And that was when I lost interest in doing these meetings. But very quickly, after social media, as I say, the balance of the media reasserted themselves. And I think it was in 2012 that I resumed doing it. It was around then, early tens, that I resumed doing these meetings, partly because I felt that something like this had become more necessary, and partly because I personally didn't like the feeling that I was losing touch. I mean, it was a very selfish attitude as well. I wanted to meet people like you, to put it bluntly, which I wouldn't have done so readily and so intimately, if I may so phrase it, if it had just been a question of showing up at other people's meetings. So that's the dates. There was a gap, and then I resumed. And I started in 1990, which is when I moved into this flat. And so with one interruption, I've been doing it ever since. About a quarter of a century, in other words.
So, I suppose, again, this is more...
And by the way, the nature of the influence, I think probably, if I had to describe the particular influence, it comes via getting people to give talks. I think the impact on your thinking of the talk that you are going to be doing at the end of this month, right here, on the subject we're talking about, it probably the most influence will be on you. And that's right. That's good. It's like a kind of freelance university or something like that. It's getting people to speak about a subject is a very good way of getting them to think about it very well. I think it's telling that Sandhurst, when it spots you as a future general, it immediately tells you to give lectures about how to run an army, even though you're only a colonel.
Yeah.
You know, that's how they prepare you for the agonies of command, by getting you to talk about it in public, or something resembling public.
Yeah. So the was it always sorry, how to rephrase this? So you're saying kind of there was the split in the main 80s between two camps. Did that progressively fragment, or was it?
There was another moment of crisis when, yes, this has a bearing on politics. Sean Gabb and Tim Evans took over jointly the running of the Libertarian Alliance, the Chris Tame bit. And they had a falling out when Sean Gabb wrote a savagely critical article about Tony Blair. I mean, just sort of, I can't remember the exact language, but it was pretty over the top. And Tim, partly because he has jobs in the respectable world, unlike Sean Gabb, and certainly unlike me. My criticism of Sean Gabb is that, in my opinion, he didn't distinguish clearly enough between his own opinions and libertarianism. Of course, as libertarians, we all have tastes and preferences in other matters. And the only libertarian attitude towards that is, well, you're entitled to your opinion. You know, if you and I have different tastes in music, it's not a political issue, because neither of us think that music should be subsidized or people should be forbidden to listen to it if we personally don't like it. So it's not a libertarian issue. But I think Sean often applied his libertarian thinking to very particular and very contentious issues, and didn't clarify enough what was him and what was the Libertarian Alliance. That's my disagreement with him.
Okay.
But it was very amicable. I lost touch with him, but up until the point where I lost touch with him, it was perfectly civil. So, you know. But he's a very clever guy. He's written lots of books, which have done very well, as far as I can tell. I haven't read many of them, but he's a man of great talent and great energy. And in many ways, he's an example of the way that ideas find their way from something like the little libertarian movement in London into the wider world, in the form, in his case, of writing fiction.
Okay, all right.
I recommend you look him up.
Yeah. Okay.
He has a. I think I've got a copy of a book of his, which I can give you. This is good because it gives you his name that he writes under.
Okay, brilliant. Excellent. Yes, I shall look at this. So I suppose.
But to finish the Sean Gabb story, I get the feeling that he sort of. Let me just shut this door. Hang on. I get the feeling that Sean didn't much enjoy running the libertarian movement, because it was a distinct activity from expressing his own opinions for him. And he handed it over to another guy who runs something called the Ludwig von Mises something, I can't remember. But I've lost touch with large chunks of the libertarian movement. What can I tell you? I run my little tiny bit of it. It bothers me less that I don't know who all the other libertarians are. I remember my mother, who used to work as a charitable lady, she used the expression, "I've done my bit," when she reached about the age I've reached now. And that's how I feel about it. But I recommend you try and talk to Sean Gabb. or communicate with him.
Yes, definitely.
That's if you've got time. I mean, you're doing this talk in about 8 days' time.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you wish to pursue the matter with a view to understanding whether out of natural, just sheer interest and curiosity, or whether you think certain lessons can be drawn from all this,
I suppose it's because I see so many similarities. I think that's, and I'm actually quite, I'm not glad that the movement has faltered so much, or kind of but I'm glad that I can, because I do want to talk about the present and the future as well, that from what I look at, I can still see these things, like from the liberalists and ourselves in the LPUK. There's another one now called the Liberty People Party. The differences between those three parties are, I mean, they're all minarchists, they're all libertarian, they have manifestos and things, but nothing that couldn't be hashed out by an NCC and a committee and a few votes or whatever. But it is, the driving force of it is who's running it. Now, I'm not that much of an egoist. I mean, if someone came along with 30 people to my 5 who show up to my meetups and said, well, I'm going to run this, yeah, whatever, I don't care really. It's about the idea and the cause for me is more important. But it's interesting that no one will. Like, they came to one of our things, we had one of our conferences, and I mean, they were, this was the liberalists came to.
Now, I got a when I read the result of the general election votes in my constituency in Westminster, I came across somebody called the Liberal Party who got 100 votes. Was that?
No, that wouldn't. We didn't run
the Liberal Party, which is not the same.
No. I've spoken to my ex-chairman, Andrew, who's knowledgeable on these things, and he said there are over 40 political parties using the word liberty or liberal in their name in the UK,
and it means all sorts of different things.
Yes. Now that they would be kind of, that would be the libertarian mind ones, like that there were over 40 small parties. It is phenomenal kind of how that's come together. But I kind of, I can see that. That's what I was wondering about.
My opinion of all this, or an opinion I hold, is that people their talents are what they are. Their natural abilities are pretty unchangeable, and trying to turn yourself into a talented politician, well, it can't be done. You either are a talented politician, in which case you behave like a politician from the age of about 15, or you're not. And if you think that at the age of 30 it would be nice for somebody to be a talented politician, I know what, I'll have a go. Forget about it. You're not going to do it. It's bloody hard. I think libertarians are very fond of denouncing politicians, and this includes the claim that they're stupid and ignorant and don't know anything. But the truth is, politicians know a hell of a lot about politics. They may not know much about taxation or, the money supply, but they do know how to do politics, and they're much better at it than you are. That's my attitude towards libertarians. I mean, a good example is Nigel Farage, who is a genius politician. But are there any other geniuses on the Brexit side devoting themselves to that one issue? Well, maybe Claire Fox, but hardly any. And who's that other woman who defected from the Conservatives? Widdicombe.
Oh, Anne Widdicombe.
She's a talent. They're the real deal, those few. But all these other nutters, they're just people. They're people like you and me. They're just punters who have no special ability to do politics, which is very, very difficult.
I know, I do agree with you, because the kind of, I suppose I always wanted to get involved with politics, but I found myself in an ideological trap for about 15 years of not knowing what I really believed, and so that stunted me. But I do know of people who have wanted to go into politics, and they do start at 15, 16 volunteering and then going in. And I mean, that's learning.
And before they even know that that's what they want, that's what they're doing, they're just doing it automatically. You know, they naturally shake hands with strangers and do the version of kissing babies that applies to their life, you know. And they have a natural sort of ability to get people to cooperate and all agree about what they're going to do and then do it. And
but that's, I mean, that's
it's a skill.
Yeah, it's like kind of when Sinn Féin got big back home in the last kind of 15 years, I think it is. They've just like kind of blew up in the south as a political force. But I remember a girl I went to school with, her sister, she was called Saoirse, I can't remember what her sister was called. But Sinn Féin singled her out as someone they wanted to be a councillor. And they just poured money at her, but she obviously had that natural talent to do that. And she just went from whatever she was doing, working in a salon or whatever, to being a counsellor.
Yeah.
And they do that, and it is just these...
And of course, the skill of spotting people is a skill in its own right.
Yeah.
You know.
And again, and I suppose kind of...
But this doesn't stop libertarian ideas finding their way into mainstream politics. I suppose the most impressive personality in Britain from this point of view would be Steve Baker, MP, whom I have met a couple of times, as have thousands of others, and he impresses the hell out of me. And he has a much deeper and firmer grasp of Austrian economics than I do, definitely, no question. He's read more than I have, he understands it better. I remember visiting Tim Evans for the first general election where the Labour Party lost after Blair. The one where Brown was he lost.
Yeah.
And I watched it on TV with Tim Evans at his home, and his only concern was, will Steve Baker be elected? That was all he cared about. And I agree with that. I think that was a very interesting question, and subsequent events have not changed my mind, and that's putting it mildly. When you think of the impact that guy has already had, it's phenomenal. And I think, as far as he's concerned, the best could very well be yet to come, because he has earned an enormous amount of respect through the way he's handled himself through the whole Brexit story, never more so than when he refused office with Theresa May after he resigned from Theresa May's government in disgust at what she was doing, and the fact that his work to achieve a good Brexit was just sidelined. And then when Boris Johnson first became Prime Minister, he was offered a job and he didn't want it. He said, no, I'm going to make my own job, thank you. I'm going to watch this and tell you whether I think it's good. And his voice by then really counted for something, and that's partly because he's a very nice man. He's very principled, but he's very nice. He doesn't make he's not personally obnoxious to anyone. He's a Christian. I think that has an influence on things. And a remarkable man, given that he didn't come into politics until he was 30 something more, I think, you know.
So,
and I'd pick him out as he's influenced not so much by the libertarian movement as by the wider classical liberal movement, of which I believe the libertarian movement is a part. It's what you might call the provisional wing. It's intellectually speaking, it's the one which tests ideas to destruction and doesn't care whether you agree. You know.
I suppose then. The next thing then would be, kind of leading on from that, would be tangible impact. Where do you see that the kind of libertarian movement has made that, say, progressing from 87 to now?
I think there are now a large number of people who know approximately what it is. and who see its relevance in lots of areas. I'm guessing that quite a lot of the members of the Conservative Party are fond of using phrases like, I'm not a libertarian, but, and then they apply it to some particular interest of theirs. That, I would guess, is one of the impacts. The left, I think, put it like this, I believe I learned a lot from the left about how to spread ideas. And I think when they see the libertarian movement, there's a certain kind of leftist who says, my God, these people are doing exactly what we did. In other words, the libertarian movement now is in the same sort of state that socialism was in the late 19th century. Lots and lots of deluded individuals who thought that the revolution was about to happen, you know, in the next 18 months. And they were all of them, as I say, round the twist. But doing the stuff in meetings and gatherings and pamphlets and now the internet. And it can have big consequences, this kind of thing. If you, the metaphor I'm fond of is pissing in the swimming pool. For a long time, it appears to have accomplished nothing, but then suddenly you realise the pool is starting to turn yellow. You know? That sort of thing is what I think we're doing, and that's the kind of historical analogy I'd want to point to. But then I think there are a lot of ideologists who comfort themselves with those sorts of ideas, that we're in the very early stages of making history, but we're not making it yet, you know, that sort of thing. Could be it'll never get any further than it has now. But I do think that free market economics in the broader and more respectable sense has a very big impact on the world in the following sort of way, that lots of people don't like it. They think it's cold and, you know, money is everything and everything else is nothing, is the way they react to it. But they kind of know that this is actually how the world works. They wish it were not so, but they accept that it is so.
That actually it is.
And in that sense, broadly free market ideas, of which libertarianism is part, has had a big impact on the world. I think more and more intelligent people around the planet know that if you do to a country what they did to Venezuela, what you're going to get is Venezuela. And we wish it wasn't so. We wish that spouting socialism could make it all happen the way socialists would like it to, but it ain't so. In other words, they see libertarianism as truthful but unattractive.
I would genuinely agree.
And I think you have to. It helps to. This is where it helps to be old. Lots of things about being old that are horrible, but this is good. You are able to compare your time now with your time when you were a child. You know, when I was a lad. And the truth is that actually, when I was a lad, I was reading books my father had collected in the 20s and 30s. And the confidence in dirigism that those books displayed has now disappeared. The idea that because Jeremy Corbyn is making as much of a nuisance of himself as, you know, the Communist Party was in the 1920s, that therefore nothing's changed, is a big mistake. In the 1920s, very smart people believed that there was nothing wrong with the world that them seizing control of it wouldn't put right, and that progress would then hurtle forwards, and industrialism and, you know, factories and manufacturing of goodies would just hurtle forwards in a wonderful way. They don't think that now. If anything, they're looking for excuses for destroying all that. And that's a very big change, very big.
So actually, that's an interesting.
But I don't think that's only the libertarian one. I think that's the whole thing, the whole classical liberal thing. I don't know quite how we distinguish libertarianism from its wider ideological setting, but I certainly want to. I mean, I go back to the fact that the very first thing I did when I came to London was I knocked on the door of the IEA. And they sent me to the libertarian tendency, you know. And I think there's a lot of toing and froing going on.
So this is an interesting one. I know a lot of libertarians don't like to talk about it because, again, it runs into the personal opinion versus libertarian. But when the left, I don't know the history of this, to me it happened recently, when the left started progressing more away from economics into intersectionalism and social, did that then have an impact? Were you having to address issues that you didn't have to before, or did it just not matter?
Well, to me, the interesting thing is the way the left itself is changing what it's saying. And I've thought a lot about that, and I find it very interesting. You know, if you want me to give you 2 minutes on that, I'll give it a shot. If you want. I mean, what strikes me is that they've always wanted a social upheaval. They start with the kind of adolescent view that it's all so unfair. You know, we hate the world. We hate the way that we can't stay out till 2 in the morning or whatever some 13-year-old wants to do. That seems to me to be the foundation idea, and there's some truth in it. You know, the world could be better. It's true. It's unfair. It could be fairer. Yes, it could indeed. And what they've done is they said, right, there's two reactions anybody can have to that insight. And that one is, well, the world has got to change. And the other is, well, I've just got to deal with it. And the left is them saying, oh, I'm not going to change. Fuck it. You know, the world's going to have to bloody well shape itself up. And that is, I think, where a lot of radical politics comes from. And it's kind of like that for the libertarian movement. You know, we say, oh, it's not good enough for us to just get with the program. The program's going to bloody well change if we have any say in the matter. You know, taxes are going to nosedive. You're going to be able to take all the drugs you like, and if you know, and go searching for whatever medical help you need on the free market, you know, and so on. But it seems to me that the left attitude is, yep, the world's got to change. Somebody's got to take a grip on it. I know what, us, you know, a group of the elect. And they've looked for an army, and they've looked for an excuse for a revolutionary upheaval to achieve the nirvana of perfect socialism. And they started, their first army was the industrial proletariat of the rich countries. They let them down. They turned out to be content with the goodies of capitalism, and their only complaint about it was they didn't have enough. But capitalism itself was fine. And they wanted nice houses and nice cars, and you know. And you could feel the left in the 60s, and now I speak from personal experience, giving up on the working class. And they switched to the ethnics and sexually deviant, whatever. You want to find a word that isn't judgmental, sexually unconventional, so to speak. They wanted to put together a kind of big revised army of all these malcontents. What did the ethnics do? They let them down again. And now, of course, you've got gays speaking for Trump and all this. You've got gays who are saying, well, we can get married. We want the same nice things that everybody else wants. And you can feel the left already. They began to see this coming. I mean, they saw the workers abandoning. They watched the third world getting rich. Oh dear, you know, the Asian tigers. And now Hong Kong has a higher average income than Britain. It soon won't, but you know. And so the left then switched to another army, which was going to be the environment. The environment was going to be the destructive revolutionary force that would destroy the powers that be and knock them off their thrones. So the left I see constantly developing. I find it harder to think in that sort of way about my own team, perhaps because I'm too personally involved in it. But that interests me very much, the way that... the crucial thing is optimism versus pessimism. The left in the 30s and 20s was very optimistic. All it needed was for them to be in charge, and then everything would be fine. Now, they are prophesying catastrophe. As they're saying either you put us in charge or the world goes to hell, descends into catastrophe. And that's not exactly, as Trump himself has said, it's not a very appealing doctrine. But it's very different. That's the point I want to make.
So, I mean, in that regard, then, kind of as a juxtaposition, have you noticed that, I mean, speaking as a white middle-class male, I suppose I am the representative of kind of libertarianism, but I mean, has there been an expansion with different people? Was there always kind of different ethnic groups, women, and that in the movement? Or?
I think it's always been men of a certain age,
yeah.
Honestly. My only attitude that's different from other people, mild disappointment, but personally I don't regard that as in the slightest bit, it's not an insuperable barrier.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that men of a certain age are sensible enough to be libertarians is not a criticism of men of a certain age, it's a criticism of everybody else. If you can't see it, then you are making a mistake.
Was there ever an effort just within your own movement to kind of
broaden the appeal
to some identity
Occasionally
politics,
such efforts are made, but they haven't worked. I notice, the male thing is interesting. I notice that the number of women who come to my regular meetings, an extraordinary proportion of them come from outside Britain. Londoners who are not British.
Yes.
Eastern Europeans, for example. But people from all over the world who've come to London, thereby displaying the kind of individual attitude towards life's problems that naturally attracts them to libertarian thinking. It could be that back in their own countries they would fit in much more with the sort of wider classical liberal world and have friends who are parliamentarians and all this. Whereas here, this is the best they can do, my meetings, until they find something better. But whatever the explanation, that is something I notice. But I don't complain. I'm not, to me, it's very stupid to expect something you do, some hobby or ideological enthusiasm, to appeal equally to every sort of person in the world. Why would that happen? People are different, and not just they're culturally different. They grow up in different worlds. I think the reason why so many Eastern European women and Eastern European people in general attend my meetings is because they have recent knowledge of communism, and that changes their whole view of the world. They look at the left and they hear the things Corbyn says. My God, don't these people realise what they're trying to do to their country? So, it appeals to some people more than others. But I went to a meeting just a couple of days ago, actually, where a guy who is an entrepreneur, he runs a record label, classical music record label, and he went to a conference where a business consultant was giving away his wisdom. He was a pretty high-powered guy, and he was in the habit of giving lengthy advice to very big organizations. But he said, well, why don't I do 10 minutes for anyone who wants it at this conference? And my mate Martin signed up for this, and the guy said to him something very interesting. He said, stop worrying about the fact that your core demographic for your products is old people with grey hair. Concentrate on reaching all of them. That would be the smart thing to do. And if you do that, you've much increased your chances of drawing in other people.
Yeah.
And that puts precisely my less well-formulated attitude towards how to do libertarianism. If you hold a meeting and if a meeting happens, supposing you the one you're coming, supposing 20 men show up, that's a good meeting as far as I'm concerned. That's about as much as we can fit in this room, and I'll take it. If you offered me 25 men, including 5 youngsters who are prepared to sit on the floor, that's it. I'll take it right there, because you spread it around among one network, really spread it. You've done well.
And
I don't remember what the question was for that answer, but
Sure.
Who cares?
But it is interesting because
Well, it was about the diversity thing.
yeah.
I think that all attempts to be more diverse tend to be a bit. I'll give you an example though of an argument I'm reminded of. Do you know? There's a chap called Alistair who shows up to these meetings sometimes. I think he was at your previous talk.
Oh.
And he has said to me many times that libertarians should not be so hostile towards transgender activists because they come over as hostile to people who are transgender. And I think there's substance in that complaint. I think transgenderism is a very difficult issue for libertarians because the only transgender activism that gets noticed is transgender activism of a very bossy and intrusive and anti-freedom kind. It consists of demanding that other people rearrange their toilets to suit them, other people rearrange their sports teams or their tattooing parlors or whatever it is to fit in with their desires. And if you do not, you can feel the hostility in what I'm saying. If we do not fit in with their wishes, we are discriminating against them. I don't think wishes work like that. I don't think they should. It's one thing to wish that a woman will, snip the pubic hairs off your clearly male sex organs, but quite another for you to demand that she be obliged by law to do that. That seems to me wicked. And the danger of just banging on about how wicked that is that anybody with a sexually, let's say, unconventional view of things could be put off. But gays haven't been put off. Gays are flocking to libertarianism because the best of them and most of them just wanted that thing. They wanted the law to stop telling them how to live. And they wanted the same kind of satisfactions that come from settled domestic life. I mean, marriage is a bit of a statist institution, but I was totally in favour of gay marriage, as I think most libertarians are, despite the fact that it actually involves some state rearrangements and sort of pension rights and all kinds of things like that. I think the principle that if two people want to exchange vows in public, in front of their friends, which they intend to have legal consequences, I think they absolutely should be allowed to do that. And I think Britain is a much better place for the fact that gays are not being tormented the way they were. It was just horrible.
Yeah.
Just ghastly what happened. I've got completely conventional opinions about that, but I think that people will find their way to these ideas if you just spread them. They'll hear them. They'll say, this is good stuff, but we're going to rewrite it to fit our preoccupations. And that'll all happen if we do what we should be doing, which is spreading the ideas to anyone who'll listen.
So I suppose then kind of as an aside from that, what would you say are the best ideas to spread that you have seen actually get through to people who would not have been libertarian? If there's anyone kind of an example of conversion or something.
Well, I think that I liked drug legalization, and I still do, because it separates us from the sort of people who only believe in the free market because they're doing well in it, or who are thought to be like that. I can remember when I started as a libertarian, it seemed to me what was missing was a wider sense that these people who believed in the free market really did believe in it because they thought it was a good thing, for all the same reasons socialists believe in socialism, that it would be a better way for the world to conduct its affairs. And they sincerely believe that, whether they did well in the market or badly or hopelessly. Then that's exactly my opinion. To me, libertarianism is sort of an outreach to socialists
Mhm.
in a funny kind of way. You know, all the people who take ideas seriously believe in reading books and then doing what it says, which by and large conservatives don't. Those are the people we still want to reach. And it's possible that there'll be some miraculous transformation of sentiment amongst some future generation, and all the people who would have been socialists now will stop being socialists and become something much more like libertarians. And it could even be happening now. I wouldn't know.
I don't know. Not that I've seen, but so
I do get the feeling that conservatives have become much more libertarian.
yeah,
And they've certainly abandoned their claim that any claim they ever had that gays ought to be locked up and all that crap, you know.
I think we were a "Have I Got News for You" episode away from having a gay prime minister. I think. What was his name? I can't remember the guy's name. But
William Hague?
No,
well,
he was. I think he was foreign secretary when David Cameron was in power. So was very well turned out, grey hair, tan, and he went on. It was an expensive scandal, and he went on, and he was very glib about it, and then.
Yes.
The thing kind of blew up the next 2 days or 3 days after the episode came out, and he had to.
Well, it's noticeable that the Conservatives are the ones who've had the woman prime ministers.
Yes.
Whatever you think of them, I mean, I thought Thatcher was pretty good, and I thought not a libertarian, but big chunks of the agenda were proclaimed.
But would you? Is that more? Sorry, I'm just going to figure out what I'm trying to say. I think the left kind of refused to see that kind of. Sorry, that's more of
my opinion of the left is that at the heart of it is the drama, the melodrama that I described of seeking social transformation by a series of vast sort of social upheavals. And if you're not prepared to be part of that process, you're the enemy. It doesn't matter what, you can be very gay indeed, very feminist indeed is now starting to happen. If you're not with it, if you're not a member of that army, then you can go and jump in a lake. And that shows you what their priorities are. They have decided that social upheaval is essential. Got to have it. And if you don't believe in it, then you are the enemy. And of course, that's their objection to the Blairites, because the Blairites were saying we can improve the world, we can sort of smooth the sharp edges and encourage this and discourage that. We don't need to have the bloody great catastrophe to make the world better. And in that respect, they completely disagree with the Corbynites. Which, by the way, is the source of the Corbynites' anti-Semitism, which was no trivial matter. It was central to their view of the world, that the bad guys had to beat the good guys, and it didn't matter how good the bad guys were or how bad the good guys were. The fact is, we'd already decided who's in which army, and it's Israel is evil. That's it.
Yeah.
And we might as well just kill all the Jews while we're at it, just to make sure that no Jews who believe Israel was okay get through. You know? Which to me is a monstrous way of looking at the world, and monstrously stupid. But I don't think all Labour Party members think like this by any means. They made it pretty clear at the last general election they don't. But I think that the Labour Party, I think that the core of the socialist vision has made the running on the left.
Yeah.
I do think that. In the same sort of way, I think libertarians have made the running on the right, actually.
Yeah.
I think the free market has constantly eroded claims that other things matter more or instead.
So it's an interesting distinction, and it might be going back to the 20s or 30s now, but conservatives as pro-free market, because that used to be the bastion of the Liberal Party when they were around.
Mhm.
That then just got swallowed into conservatism.
I think that's right. Yes, I think it did.
With the rise of Labour.
Yeah, yeah. I think the old Liberals, almost the pre-Lloyd George Liberals, and the thing is, party loyalties hang around for a long time.
Yeah.
Lloyd George transformed the Liberal Party in terms of what it said, but there were still plenty of Liberal Party members who carried on thinking, low tax, not deregulation, just not regulation. But those people knew finally in about the 1950s, their descendants, their intellectual and literal descendants, realised that the Liberal Party was gone as far as they were concerned, so they switched to the Conservative Party, insofar as they switched to anything at all.
So, right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I could ask now, just to get kind of back on topic.
I wasn't expecting this to be so up in the air and grandiose. I was thinking that I would be telling you, I would be scratching my head and what's that 2007 or was it 2000? Much more of that, and much less of this sort of big picture.
Well, I want to do more of the ideas, because it's going to make more sense to people like, say, Tamara, say, or even to myself, who have no experience, who literally came to this country in less than 10 years ago. So this is the only libertarianism we've known, is kind of what you've given us, what I've seen in API UK and stuff. So this is, so what I'll be doing is, it's interesting to see that these ideas and the challenges are consistent almost across the board. It's kind of, how can you reach people? What should you say? Kind of the.
I have some opinions about how to reach people that might be relevant. I wrote a piece called, I think it was called The Tyranny of the Facts. And it was about how people do and do not arrive at different opinions. I believe, for example, that the way to persuade people is not to confuse persuading somebody with persuading them on the spot. I think your first step is simply to present what you're trying to put forward politely, clearly, and in the full knowledge that the other person who's listening may think you're talking nonsense, and very ready to listen to what he thinks instead, and with a view to understanding his point of view. And then a long time later, he may or may not change his mind. But also, of course, you may change your mind in the light of what he said to you, or she. But it's mostly men, so it's he. Mostly it's men arguing. They like to lock antlers. Women tend to be more quieter, more agreeable, I think is the word. So not surprisingly, if they're more agreeable, they spend less time in their lives disagreeing. Makes sense. All generalizations have their exceptions, of course. But the way you argue is by presenting and being understood and distinguishing that from the statement, I think taxation should be, let's start by saying halved. That would be a mighty good step in the right direction if you just slash taxes. That's one statement. And another statement is, if you don't agree with me, you're an imbecile. That's not the same statement. And the beginning of wisdom as a persuader is to understand that distinction, I think. One of the things that has rather put me off writing more about politics than I have in the last 10 years is this atmosphere of belligerence and nastiness. Just, you think that, therefore you think these other things which make you evil, therefore.
Have you seen that kind of, like, that is very much a social media thing?
I've seen it on social media, and I lurk on Twitter and Facebook. I have I have a few friends who write on Facebook, and I read what they say, but I don't say anything on social media.
But have you noticed that kind of belligerence then kind of infecting, for want of a better word, the kind of libertarian movement?
Not so much, actually.
Okay.
I don't think I have. But that doesn't mean much because I see less and less of it in the broader picture. Actually, no, I don't. I think it hasn't. But I think lots of people have said this. Social media give a very false idea of what people are really like.
Yeah.
A lot of it's just people blowing off steam, you know. Trying to think how else you persuade. I think books are very important. I'm no good at writing them, but I do think they matter. That's why I possess so many. Of all the big ideas doing the rounds at the moment, I think the one that's making the most impact is the claim that progress is something you do by having a free market, and the claim that it is happening on a grand scale thanks to the free market, and that this is all a good thing. Economic progress is denounced by the left more and more because it's ruining the weather, polluting the environment, and turning everybody into moral monsters. I don't agree with any of that.
Is there...
And I think it's very significant that, I mean, there's an organisation called progress.org, which lists all the ways in which the world's getting better. The last decade was the best decade we've ever had. Yeah. I think it's very good stuff.
I've quoted from that before.
Highly significant, you know. Anyway, sorry.
No, it was just kind of with that, I suppose it's a hot topic issue, as it were, kind of the environmentalism on the left, which I believe came about in the 80s, in a bigger way. Was there a challenge to that? When did it start being addressed by the libertarian movement?
Well, I think the people who addressed it were not political; they were climate scientists.
Okay.
I believe central to the claim made by the likes of Greta Thunberg is the claim that there's going to be an environmental catastrophe. And if there's going to be a catastrophe, that means that there is no cost that we shouldn't be willing to undertake. So economics doesn't come into it. There was a recent statement by some a member of the Trump administration saying Greta Thunberg doesn't know anything about economics, but she doesn't have to.
No.
If there's going to be an environmental catastrophe and we're all going to be consumed by fire and the sea and everything else, then the question of what it costs to stop that is irrelevant. I mean, people of my age have a habit of going back to 1940, but it was the essence that of what was decided in 1940, that there was no horror worse than the horror of being ruled by Adolf Hitler. And it didn't matter what. Yes, young men are going to die in their hundreds of thousands. You're right, but I'm afraid it has to happen. And that's the sort of argument the environmentalists are putting forward. Personally, I think their prophecies of doom are fallacious, but that's not an economic argument. That's not something libertarians are used to arguing. That is a climate science argument. Have they got the climate science right? And the fact that they lie so frequently about how many climate scientists believe in a catastrophe, to me, is evidence of their absolute untrustworthiness. I already think they're politically motivated. In that sense, it is political. My reasons for distrust, for absolutely denying the environmental vision of disaster, is that they were looking for a disaster for the reasons I said. They thought they'd found it in economics, the Marxist claim that capitalism was dividing the world into a tiny few billionaires, zillionaires, and everybody else who was being impoverished. That was nonsense. It was the reverse of the truth.
That's actually it's the interesting one now that they've come out with again, that the 1% or whatever, however many people, billionaires or whatever, that they own 50% of the wealth. And it's like, yes, okay, if you bring that back to 1400, that would be excessive. But the vastness of the wealth that we have,
Yes.
that other 50% is enough almost to go around to everyone
absolutely.
else.
And the fact that it's increasing all the time. I mean, central to this is the claim that wealth can actually be created. There are a lot of people who, they don't explicitly assert that wealth can neither be created nor destroyed, but they talk as if that were so.
Yes.
They think as if that were so. And a trick of persuasion when you confront somebody who seems to think that is to say, well, do you think wealth can be destroyed? You know, do you think the First World War was a destructive event? Are you telling me you don't think it was a destructive event? Are you telling me that nothing bad happened during that war apart from the deaths? You know, did no property get destroyed? Do you really think that? The truth is that wealth is created and consumed all the time at a hectic rate. And the question is that rate of wealth creation and mostly consumption going up? In which case, lots of people are living better lives. You know, you and I are getting better fed, and we're doing more stuff with our lives and creating more for other people, and good for us. That's one of those ideas that Perry de Havilland of Samizdata would say was metacontext. That's what he's getting at.
Okay. And so those so what's interesting then, and kind of I'm going to go back to this now, is that idea of has there been kind of, because I know you said kind of with the IEA when you first came and they put you in touch then with libertarians, that kind of broad classical kind of liberalism that includes everyone from like objectivists to whoever.
Yes, by the way,
yeah,
Chris Tame was an objectivist.
Okay.
And that's a big story in its own right. I've got a lot of time for Rand, but not in the way that she thought and would have liked. I thought she was a hopeless philosopher, but a very fine observer of the world. That's what I think about her. And Chris Tame, the great thing about Chris Tame was that what he learned from Rand and put into practice was the observation, and it's true, that there's much more to argue about than just party politics. There is the content of soap operas and novels and films and comics and how historians write history, how geographers do geography. It all matters.
Kind of a right-wing contextualization, kind of.
Yeah, he would have resisted the phrase right-wing, but yes. And that was Rand. Rand said that strongly, that it rather like Rand in that respect was a kind of free market version of Gramsci, who also believed in culture. Indeed, I think Gramsci is probably a sort of role model for libertarians.
Okay.
Not in the content of his beliefs, but in the manner, the way to pursue them.
Yeah. So, just trying to think any avenues I haven't hit on.
I mean, I don't have a problem with you doing this again with all the things you wish you'd asked me. Because I love this. To me, this is the breath of life. I just love having conversations like this one. It's not to my credit, but I'm one of the few people I know of who has no objections to the sound of his own voice. Most people seem to not like it when they hear it played back to them. I think it's fine when I hear myself talking.
I suppose I got used to mine because I did a lot of music and stuff like that. So I got used to it, and then I do always find it funny though. I still find it funny how much of an accent I have, because again, I've said this before to uproarious laughter, that in my head I speak the Queen's English, and it's all,
and this leprechaun.
Yeah, in reality, I'm like, oh, these things here, like they're so awful, It's very strange, but
you don't dislike it, do you?
No, I don't mind it. Like it's just been amusing, kind of like, but what I have to connect that with is I can listen to it and go, God, I feel like, I sound like this awful bog man kind of, but then I think, but that's not the reaction I get from people.
No,
I don't get.
And it's not what you are.
Tittering kind of in the background,
No, just one of those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know.
So yeah, that aside,
But the point about for me, these sorts of conversations are where it's at. You know, because we're not only agreeing with each other about what fine fellows we are to be libertarians, we're also discussing how to do it and thinking about how to do it and what. Well, maybe that's wrong. You know, maybe I should have done more of that. And I certainly feel I didn't conduct myself well during that feud that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. I still think could I have changed all that for the better, given the position I was in? I don't know.
So with that kind of what I wanted to come back to was when that split happened, was that the main group of libertarians, or were there other branches, or was that it?
It felt like it,
right,
that they were, but that's only how it felt. I don't know. Yeah. Because by the nature of it, you're not in. I mean, you mentioned, what was it, 40 groups?
Yeah, 40 political parties.
First thing I've heard of it, I had no idea about that. Yeah. When, as I say, when I saw this guy had been standing as a liberal for the Liberal Party, I thought, what's that? I wonder, maybe he's one of us, you know. Maybe I should look him up and have a beer with him. Yeah. Get him to do one of these talks.
Yeah, definitely, you know?
Yeah. And I still think that's quite a good idea, actually. Chase up that guy.
Yeah. So, kind of, yeah. So that. I
mean, your last statement before I did what I always do with everyone in the world, which is interrupt them, was to say, are there any other thoughts I want to put to you? Sort of, are there any other questions? That was what you were thinking.
Yes, that's what it is. It's just something that do you find that the amount of libertarians or libertarian groups is there?
Is it increasing in size, the libertarian movement? Is that
no,
the question?
No. So it's more so because I do think that. I think that's kind of demonstrable, almost kind of. That,
good. I'm looking forward to hearing your evidence for that claim.
Yeah. But do you find, or do you have a reason other than what we've spoken about that it's so fragmented that there is no unification kind of to it?
Well, one explanation is that on the left, once you're persuaded, you're also persuaded of a kind of political model for how to do it. Now, not all socialists accept that they believe in state power to make it happen, but they are a bit of a minority. And those ones, I think, are pretty fragmented. But the ones that count for something and are the ones that make the pace in explaining what socialism is, are the ones who say that what we must do is elect a socialist government or topple the government and replace it with a socialist regime, according to taste. And then we will make everyone socialist and make all those who refuse to get with it regret it. And that's kind of it. That's the only game in town. And by its nature, it's a highly cooperative enterprise in the sense that you've got to be in touch with all of these people to make any difference.
Yeah.
That doesn't apply to libertarianism, does it?
No. So
I mean, a perfectly reasonable reaction to becoming a libertarian is to do what I've done for the last 15 years, which is to write, more like the last 7 or 8, which is to write lots of blog postings, in effect, about kittens. Yeah. You know, that's it. Yeah. Because I like it. I like kittens. So I say kittens. I'm talking about a whole world of enjoyment and interest and fascination. You know, I'm just an old geezer in the pub saying, I saw yesterday, I saw this town where a meteorite had landed somewhere in Germany and it dug a big hole and they thought, hang on, this hole makes a good protection from being attacked, so we'll build our town in the middle of it. It's got nothing much to do with libertarianism, but it was very interesting. And there was a lovely graphic of this circular town. I think it's called Nördlingen, I think.
Okay.
And that's me.
Yeah.
That's my reaction. One of my reactions to believing in freedom is that I'm free to go off and do that.
Yeah.
And I think probably that attitude is quite widespread. The logical response to believing in freedom is to say, well, I have actually got quite a bit of freedom, not as much as I'd like, but I'm going to make the most of what I've got, and I'm going to do rollerblading or grand opera or whatever it is I want to do.
So,
or make money, just go into business and do that side of the agenda. So I think, and getting somebody who thinks like that to, turn up at meetings and pass resolutions and just graft away at the misery of politics in the narrow sense is not easy, is it?
Yeah.
There's always going to be people flying off in all directions, doing their own thing.
I suppose then.
Does that make sense to you?
No, that completely does. I mean, that is pretty much what I've seen so far, and I mean, ideologically, it makes absolute sense.
I'm a pathological optimist. That's because I enjoy being an optimist. I enjoy being hopeful about the future. And to me, what I've just said, that story, we both seem to agree about it, that libertarians just go off and do their own thing, means that, in my opinion, you and I both, may be underestimating how much libertarianism has already embedded itself in the world.
It's interesting that you say that because
there don't appear to be any obvious consequences of it. But if we're right, that the world is full of people who say, yes, I do believe in libertarianism, what have you done about it? Well, not very much, but I believe in it. There's a lot of that. Yeah. There's a lot of that.
But it's an interesting kind of a thing, because even in my own life, I've seen that I've become libertarian, and I suppose it shows the strength of what you say as well, that just by making these things an issue, you influence people's thoughts. And
by not being an arsehole when you're doing it, that's crucial.
The kind of three most intelligent people I know on the left, 140 IQs or whatever, very geniuses, are still not tankies. That tankyism is now the bastion of a very, I don't know what section of the left.
It's been called a cult, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's that kind of is now, there are no mainstream,
very few unrepentant Bolsheviks.
Yeah. And I think it's a huge victory kind of for libertarians.
Well, it's more like a victory for evidence and common sense and common humanity.
Yeah.
To be indifferent to what these sorts of mentalities have brought about in the world is to perform an exercise in sort of heroic self-misinformation, I mean, you look at the slaughters these people have presided over, and the fairly direct way in which their opinions before they started doing this relate to what they subsequently did. That's, it's not, then they say, well, it's not, that wasn't socialism, what actually happened. But, if 10 times over the same people told us all what socialism was, started doing it, started murdering people, and then were told by all the other socialists, oh, that wasn't socialism. Well, that means they don't understand the consequences of their own opinions. That's what it means.
I suppose there is.
And I'm reluctant to use this language because it's a moral attack. They sort of refuse to understand their consequences. In other words, they are making a moral error. They are not just being mistaken. They're being wicked, being intellectually corrupt.
Yeah.
So, I think that's dangerous language to use in everyday conversation, because I don't think you should call people wicked unless you know them very well and you really are sure that they're wicked. That's to say they know they're doing harm and they don't care. But I do think that about some of those Corbynites, yes.
Well, from what I've seen, I mean, it is the same. It is washed away as kind of, that's not real socialism, and now we're going to talk about what real socialism is, and then you can, I mean, I think the greatest asset kind of that they have is their, what I believe is their control of the universities and third level education.
Yes.
And their ability to write, someone actually posted a tweet of it. It was very funny, and it was just these, each word was that long, kind of. It was just a sentence of these words, and it was like, and that's why you're.
By the way, I
person.
saw a tweet the day before yesterday-ish, a world ago, you know, and it basically said that some university in, I think, Sunderland was abandoning the teaching of the humanities, languages, history, and they were going to concentrate on, you know, engineering and that stuff. And this is just awful. And the commenters queued up to say, we don't see a problem with this. We really don't. And personally, I love reading Shakespeare, watching Shakespeare DVDs and all that. But I'm fucked if I see why I should pay for anyone else to be doing that. I really don't see why I should pay for you to read novels.
Oh, well, I mean...
You know, I'm not accusing you of believing any such nonsense.
As someone who was paid
the idea
to read
that humanities have that the very study of culture itself will cease if the government ceases to spend money on it strikes me as the absolute definition of stupidity. It comes back to this idea of this is a problem and the government must spend money solving that problem. They're not the same statement. And it may be a problem that the English are too uncultured and unsophisticated, and they don't have as much of a grasp of the works of J.S. Bach and, you know, James Joyce and so on. Well, there's a perfectly simple answer. Read it up yourself and start enthusing about it. That's what you do.
But I mean, I could definitely talk about that all night. But I do want to stay.
But I strongly agree with you about their command of the universities, and if,
that's actually interesting. Actually, if I could work that in, kind of that I imagine has been since the 70s, if not further. Did you run into issues with that? Did you ever try and do talks in universities or things like that?
No. When I was at university, I watched the left. This was Essex University in the early 70s. Quite an epicenter of this stuff. Yeah. And there were big demonstrations. And I watched them and I thought, these people do not know what they think they know. They are much more destructive, much less creative and helpful than they think. I didn't do anything about it, but it's an example of how ideas take a long time to... And I think the Corbynites are having much the same effect on lots of other people that those demonstrators had on me. I spent my time in the theatre, you know, and I was gradually becoming more anti-collectivist and pro-libertarian, not least because I had previously been an architecture student and I'd come to the conclusion that architectural modernism and communism, to say they were different well, they were pretty much the same enterprise. Yeah. You know, and that wasn't what you were supposed to learn from studying architecture, but it was what I learned. And
I had a very similar experience. I went into university at 18, 19 as a dyed-in-the-wall tanky, and I came out centre left gradually every year further from that, becoming more and more kind of.
I do think that there's a sort of prodigal son attitude I have towards socialists, which is if we can convert them, we've got ourselves a real asset, because here's somebody who knows about socialism from the inside, and that is a huge benefit.
Yeah, I never believed.
I mean, one of the things you remember, I mentioned this guy David Ramsay Steele. He had been a socialist, and that was a lot of the reason why he was such a force as an arguer and as a writer.
I think it's like when I tell people, and I try and explain this to socialists. Socialists will never believe that you were a socialist, that someone could turn from the path. Is just
I was a socialist when I was about 12 or 13, while I was still at school. I went to a very posh school. I was surrounded by arrogant, as I saw it then, people. And people like Lawrence Fox, who's just made a bit of a star of himself recently on Question Time. There were a lot of people like that at my school, and I looked at them and I thought, you arrogant shit,
Yeah.
If socialism means you being made to dig roads for the rest of your life, then I'm for it. That was my attitude, I think. But I soon realised that this wasn't wise.
But I mean, it kind of, I suppose what you were saying earlier then does lead into something that I've noticed, and I did notice at the time, which was that socialists, where we started, we were Socialist Workers' Party, and we went to anti-war marches, but we didn't go to the anti-war marches with the idea of just supporting them, waving our flags, talking to people, joining in. It was a recruitment drive. It was always, you had your things in your back pocket, your sign-up sheets, your copy of the Socialist Worker, and it was almost like kind of Glengarry Glen Ross. It was go out there and sell. And
well, if I'm optimistic about your ability as a libertarian in the future, you are quite a bit younger than me, to put it mildly. That would be one of the reasons that you've experienced the socialist enterprise from the inside. As I keep saying it, those guys were very clever at spreading their ideas, and it's all the more impressive how well they spread them when you consider what absolute nonsense they are. Spreading the truth is an achievement, but in a sense, spreading lies is, in a way, more impressive. I don't mean it's good. It's harder, in a sense, to foist lies on people, and yet they did it, and they're still doing it.
So then, kind of, I suppose, leading into the 80s and 90s, then, did the Libertarian Alliance or anything after that, did they ever try and go to universities?
No, we didn't. We didn't, because we didn't have the connections just didn't have the inclination. But the Institute of Economic Affairs and the Adam Smith Institute both do that on quite a scale. And it's not automatic that they will crank out clever, ambitious young chaps in pinstripe suits. They're liable to crank out people like you and me. Because the logic of the ideas is that you can fly off in any direction you like. You can say, right, I'm going to bash my way into the cabinet and bloody well cut income tax, which is great, good luck. Or you can say, well, yeah, but the trouble is that we need all the badly dressed classes to be converted. So let's have a go at them. Especially if by nature you are yourself badly dressed, which is me. That suits me very well. That's my world. And but I think libertarians are often sort of oddly snobbish about the think tanks. As if but they're just careerists or something. They almost echo the things that socialists say about them. They aren't careerists, actually. I have nothing but overwhelming respect for four men. They are Selden and Harris of the IEA, and Butler and Pirrie of the ASI. I think they're four of the greatest people I've shared my country with. I learnt a lot, especially from Selden. He was a role model of mine. He was a very eccentric editor of, in his case, lots of books as well as pamphlets. But the way he set about it was something I sort of thought, yeah, that's how you do it. That's the job. Harris was a fundraiser. Again, we didn't have people like that in the libertarian movement, but you sure as hell have to have them if you want a piece of London real estate, and you're going to get work out of people by actually paying their wages. That takes some organising. And Pirrie and Butler and Harris were all brilliant at that. Pirrie's a man, he's a brilliant man, Madsen Pirrie. And one of the things, oddly enough, I'm very fond of boasting about this. For a very short time in my life, I was a career counsellor. One of the things this is partly because I had such a hopeless career myself, that there was no humiliation they could confess to about their career that I couldn't match. So they felt more comfortable, describing their failure to get the job they wanted to somebody who'd never hardly even tried. But one of the things I advised people to try was to connect with people they assumed to be out of their class.
Yeah.
And what's the worst they could say? No. Well, okay, no. The answer's no. You can't talk to Madsen Perry. If you can, you should.
Okay.
And he'd probably make the time, because
Okay.
he's a great man and a very great educator and a great talker and he's a wonderful guy. You really should look him up.
Definitely. And where was he? He was in the...
He's Adam Smith Institute.
Okay.
It's actually surprising to me you don't know who he is. That dates him and me.
Names and me, I go through so many.
You could. I don't know where you're intending to take this. I mean, clearly, by the sound of it, it's going to be more than just one little talk in this little room. And I hope that's the case, because I think one of the ways you build a movement is by creating a history of it. I think it's, if you want to be an effective libertarian, one very colossal thing you could do would be to write a history of libertarianism.
You kind of create a myth cycle,
yes.
almost, yeah.
a narrative, as it's called nowadays, yes. And definitely Madsen Piri would be part of such a narrative.
So I suppose that's an interesting thing. Let's say where you had your badly dressed classes kind of organising events themselves. Then how did you view then the influence that Adam Smith and the IEA were having?
Well, I thought it was excellent.
Yeah.
I don't know whether all libertarians agree with me. I think the David Ramsay Steele tendency was to be a bit snooty about them.
Okay.
But, I mean, the Alternative Bookshop was basically bankrolled by the IEA.
Right.
So it never made money. And once it became clear that it never would, it had to shut, because it was costing... They never were willing to keep it going forever.
Yeah.
So therefore, as soon as it became clear that, given the way Chris and to a lesser degree I were not succeeding in making it profitable, then there was no future to it as far as they were concerned. It was only a question of when they shut it down. That was how it happened. You can imagine an alternative world where they would look at what the Alternative Bookshop was doing in terms of propaganda and say, well, we're getting value for money, so we're going to keep on doing it. But they didn't have that attitude, which is fair enough, and they shut it down. There was a small attempt made to get some money from some third party, but in order to get that money, we had to say that this quite small further subvention would be enough to keep the bookshop going forever. We weren't prepared to lie like that.
Yeah.
It would have been a flat-out lie, and we weren't prepared to say it. I can imagine it's... I mean, just as I worry about whether I could have done better for that feud, during that feud, I also feel guilty about, could I have done better for the bookshop? Could we have made it a better business? I couldn't. But maybe somebody could. Simon has ambitions along these lines, I suspect. But I don't know. I think one of the things I noticed in art is the way that the successful artists have a desire to be the kind of artists they are, and that it all works.
Yeah.
And the unhappy ones are the ones who desire to be a different sort of artist to the one they are, and they live unhappy lives. I really feel for Simon, because he did so well, and he was so unimpressed by what he had done.
So I suppose then,
is it still puffing along?
Yeah. It's still, yeah. Actually, that's a lot of time. So I suppose as kind of a conclusion then, and just kind of this will be probably something I will meld into different things. So you can be as candid as possible. It won't come through as you, and I won't be quoting you directly. Are you satisfied or happy with how things have progressed with the movement?
Depends what day of the week it is.
Yeah.
I look back on things I've done well, and friends of mine, I particularly pick out Chris Tame and Perry de Havilland. Sometimes I think, boy, that could have been a lot worse, and then other times I think it could have been a hell of a lot better. I just don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I think it's one of the great logical errors people sometimes make is that to do better you have to know how well you're doing, but that isn't true. You just have to know what better means, and do that, and you need never know how well you've been doing in order to do better.
Okay, yeah.
It's like when you're in a desert, you don't know where you are. The thing you need to know is which direction to go in and how to stick with that direction.
Yeah.
If you know that and you get it right, you stay alive, even though you don't know where you were.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, if you have your goal. Yeah.
And it's correctly identified and you know how to pursue it. And I think the way to spread ideas is to write them down, joke about them, argue about them, do all the things we do, talk about them.
So I suppose kind of then
But the short answer is I just don't know.
Would you say then kind of to kind of narrow it down a bit more, I guess some kind of answer, but would you say we live in a more libertarian world?
I would, but not because of libertarianism.
Yeah.
I think it's becoming more libertarian. I don't agree with these people who say money has got nothing to do with freedom. I think money has got a hell of a lot to do with freedom. I think the more of it you have, the more manoeuvring space you have, the more choices you have. And there's more money. People are getting richer, maybe not so fast in this country as in some other countries, but on the whole, the people of the planet are getting wealthier. The very poorest are getting less poor. And in that sense, they're becoming freer, and that's very good. But there's another more profound sense in which people generally are becoming free. And again, I don't think this has much to do with the libertarian movement. It is in their personal relationships within their families. When I was a kid, beating children was a routine procedure. Beating them I went to a school where it happened quite often. At my prep school, it happened a lot. To a degree that would now be attracting the interest of the police. That is much rarer than it used to be, I think. I could be mistaken about that, but I don't think that sort of behaviour is tolerated in posh schools the way it used to be.
That would have been kind of peer related, or would that been kind of top down?
The teachers beating the daylights out of boys. I mean, it was just, like I say, it was downright sinister, the amount of it that went on at my prep school.
Actually, my mum and dad actually had a conversation about this over Christmas, and it was urban versus rural. My mum was brought up in the countryside, and so she would have to go out and get her switch. She would then be caned with, whereas my dad, in a more urban sense, the master would have had one bought, and a kind of a nice shiny one, kind of, It is just,
not much of a choice, is it?
Cruelty.
But I think parents are now more inclined to negotiate with their children rather than just scream at them and beat them. And in that sense, the life of a child is more free. I mean, children, I think, have more influence on the way their lives develop than they used to. At the age of about 12 or 13, they're having conversations with their parents about what they're going to do, what schools they're going to go to, are they going to go to university? If they are, what are they going to study? If they get a job, what sort of job should it be? And the underlying assumption is that what the child feels inclined to do counts for a lot.
Yeah.
Well, it used not to count for anything. And I think in that sense, life is becoming profoundly more libertarian, and one's hope is that these experiences will feed into adult life. Already adult life is pretty free. Not easy, but it's free. You get to choose which battles you'll have. But I can see, I don't see life getting less free. No, I see it getting more free.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I'll stop there anyway.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I've enjoyed it. I hope you haven't minded me babbling